Medal of Honor once opened the entire markets for World War II games and cinematic shooters. Its tremendous success spawned a franchise with 15 installments and over 30 million copies in sales. Sadly, nothing lasts forever, and Medal of Honor eventually faded away, abandoned by its creators and forgotten by its fans. So what happened? What mistake led a franchise that once defined the industry to meet its end? And was it a mistake at all, or simply a sabotage? Well, buckle up, because I am the games guru, and I am excited to tell you this story. Let's get started. In the year 1994, three filmmakers, David Geffen, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and Steven Spielberg, decided to team up to start their own film production studio, Dreamworks Pictures. While making their first movies, they became interested in the fast-growing video gaming world. They saw video games not just as a new form of art and interactive entertainment, but also as a severely underserved market with low competition and immense potential. Spielberg thought that their collective filmmaking experience could produce the most immersive and cinematic video game ever created, but neither of them knew how to make games. So, they called Microsoft to collaborate. Negotiations went well, and in 1995, each side invested $30 million to create Dreamworks Interactive. They opened 2 studios in Redmond, Washington and Los Angeles, California, and hired 75 people. To manage the studio, Microsoft relocated one of its executive game producers, Alan Hartman, and in no time, Dreamworks started making games. But despite their enthusiasm, making good games turned out to be tough for the studio. According to Los Angeles Times, their most successful video game of that period only sold 130,000 copies, which wasn't great even for a medium-sized studio at that time. But Spielberg didn't give up and continued brainstorming ideas. In 1997, while he was working on his movie Saving Private Ryan, he saw his son playing GoldenEye 007 on his Nintendo 64. Spielberg was amazed by the cinematic aspect of the game and how his son totally immersed himself into James Bond's story. At this moment, he wished there was a similar game about World War II that could show the historical significance of the era to younger generations. That moment clicked something in Spielberg's mind, setting him off in a new creative direction. Work on the original Medal of Honor started in late 1997, but the actual development didn't kick off until February 1999. This delay was needed to plan the project carefully because the studio's bosses worried that the World War II theme was outdated and players were now more into ray guns, hellspawns, and laser rifles. Spielberg's good intentions alone weren't enough to start the development. But he convinced Microsoft to give it a try, pointing out that there wasn't much competition in the World War II-themed video games. The studio took GoldenEye 007 as their reference, and the development had finally began. Spielberg was personally directing each scene, but despite this, the first demo strongly disappointed him. He was afraid that it felt too childish, and the worst part was that he didn't know how to fix it. Then the studio recruited Dale Dye, a Vietnam War veteran, as the game's military advisor, who had previously advised Spielberg on Saving Private Ryan. Dye, too, criticized the demo as exploitative and irresponsible. But Spielberg explained that it was the exact reason why Dye was invited here. He also shared about his intentions to educate young people about World War II, which convinced Dye to stay with the project, where he added more historical accuracy and educational segments. Eventually, Dye got so invested into the development that he even voiced every briefing in the game.
Sub-hunting planes searched endlessly for U-boat periscopes, and when they found one, the results could be devastating.
By March 1999, the game had reached the prototype stage with significant changes. Spielberg aimed to pioneer new experiences in interactive entertainment, mixing action-packed events with interactive sequences like Show Me Your Paper. But even before its release, Medal of Honor faced 2 major controversies. First, after the Columbine High School massacre in 1999, the studio had to remove some particularly violent scenes from the game to avoid further scrutiny. Then, the Congressional Medal of Honor Society criticized the use of the sacred symbol, such as the Medal of Honor, in a video game. These controversies slowed the development, taking a great toll on the studio as it was forcing them to add changes into already polished product. Spielberg was even thinking about canceling the release, but studio's managers convinced Medal of Honor Society's president Paul Bucha that the project was made with serious and honorable intentions, saving the project from cancellation and earning Bucha's endorsement. However, severe unexpected losses forced Spielberg and his team to sell Dreamworks Interactive 3 months before Medal of Honor's release. The studio was acquired by Electronic Arts, who was studio's publisher at the time, for $10 million. Fortunately for gamers, these dark events didn't reflect on the quality of the game itself, and Medal of Honor, released in November 1999, shook up the industry to its core. It squeezed every last drop of power from the first Sony PlayStation, offering incredible graphics, AI, physics, and a remarkable game design and storyline. Medal of Honor revolutionized gaming industry, quickly building a solid fan base and selling over 1 million copies worldwide, with an average rating of 90% from gamers and critics. Unfortunately, the game found its success after Spielberg closed the deal with Electronic Arts, and EA, possessing the rights to a very successful game, had quickly rushed the sequel. After EA took over Dreamworks Interactive in February of 2000, the studio right away got to work on the sequel to Medal of Honor. With new management in charge, they decided to move away from the action-packed military style of the previous game and create a more personal and intimate experience, while retaining the core gameplay mechanics. To achieve this, they chose Marine Baptiste, a French resistance activist, as the main character. Baptiste had a brief appearance in the original Medal of Honor and was based on Hélène Deschamps-Adams, a real-life member of the French resistance. Underground kept the same gameplay mechanics as its predecessor, but had a completely different vibe. It was often dark, gritty, and extremely serious. However, after completing the main game, players could try non-canonical missions where they could fight mythical enemies in a castle. Medal of Honor Underground was released in October 2000, exclusively for PlayStation 1. Many respected gaming magazines gave the game positive reviews, acknowledging its attempt to offer a new experience while keeping the old gameplay. However, it couldn't outshine its predecessor, and despite receiving favorable reviews averaging 85%, the game sold just under 400,000 copies. Its port for Game Boy Advance was particularly poorly received, even being labeled as one of the worst games for that platform. Unfortunately, the new sequel didn't make the splash its predecessor did, and Medal of Honor Underground had literally went underground. However, Electronic Arts were not disappointed at all, as the performance of the new installment indicated that EA got its hands on a very capable franchise. They had immediately began to plan the next Medal of Honor game, when suddenly they received a note from Steven Spielberg, who was asking for a permission to create the third installment himself. Even after the unfortunate fate of Dreamworks Interactive, Spielberg still wanted to produce another Medal of Honor game, but to do this, he needed a team. He initially approached ID Software with the project, but they were too busy with their own games at the time. Instead, they suggested the filmmaker to contact a studio called 2015 Inc. as a good fit for the job. Spielberg reached out to them in May 2000, and development began shortly after. 2015 was interested on working on the new Medal of Honor game, not just because of Spielberg's involvement, but also because EA promised them a partnership if the game succeeded. This offer was a big deal for 2015, as it was a small studio with only 2 games under its belt before Allied Assault. The person most interested in this deal, however, was 2015's lead programmer, Vince Zampella, who was promised an executive producer's role if the game did well. To achieve his goal, Vince worked tirelessly, consulting Spielberg on what gamers wanted and trying to match the filmmaker's vision with EA's requirements. Finally, in January 2002, after 2 years of hard work, Medal of Honor Allied Assault was released as a PC exclusive for Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. Many scenes and plot sequences were straight copied from Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan, which didn't bother anyone because every other aspect of the game was a top-notch. The game's innovative design gave players more freedom, and its perfectly balanced gameplay attracted fans of both arcade and realistic-style shooters. Allied Assault received favorable reviews from esteemed gaming publications, being hailed as the best single-player game of 2002 and the best single-player shooter since Half-Life. It sold over 2 million copies, grossing over $40 million, and garnered numerous Game of the Year nominations and awards. Allied Assault was a massive success, satisfying both Spielberg and Electronic Arts. However, shortly after its release, Spielberg announced that he was done with the video gaming industry and preferred to focus on movies instead. This announcement disappointed many gamers and signaled to EA that the franchise wouldn't go over Allied Assault. Traitorously, EA decided to take control of the franchise on their own, kicking 2015 out of the contract. Being angered by this decision, Vince Zampella gathered his friends, sent the industrial giant to hell, and went to Activision to establish Infinity Ward and create Call of Duty as a form of vengeance. Though working with Activision had its own challenges, and in 2010, Vince returned to EA to work on Titanfall and Battlefield franchises. The story of the Call of Duty franchise is thrilling in its own way, with several unexpected plot twists. I am preparing a documentary about it right now, set to release in 2 weeks. So if you don't want to miss it, then you should subscribe to the channel. Appreciate it. After Medal of Honor Underground, Electronic Arts rebranded Dreamworks Interactive as EA Los Angeles and assigned them of developing the next game in the franchise, Medal of Honor Frontline. Frontline was developed alongside Allied Assault, using the same ID Tech 3 game engine, interface design, and unique features. Its story is set during the events of the first Medal of Honor and give more attention to characters' development. The success of Allied Assault gave the series a significant boost in quality confidence from gamers, and that was the main reason why Medal of Honor Frontline, released in May 2002, was a massive success. Although it didn't receive as much praise from journalists as the previous installment, averaging an 81% rating, it sold a staggering 4 million copies, which was even more than Allied Assault. This massive success signaled to Electronic Arts that they had a truly profitable franchise in their hands, after which EA's exploitative attitude towards the series marked the franchise's first downfall. In 2003, during a troubling staff restructuring at Electronic Arts, employees from EA Los Angeles and 4 other studios were shuffled around, including the studio's current CEO, Alan Hartman, who had originally been appointed by Microsoft. I couldn't find any information about the studio's new management, so it's likely that it didn't have a CEO during that period and was instead overseen by EA's corporate managers. Over the next 5 years, they released 8 Medal of Honor games. The average rating for these games is 70%, with Pacific Assault and Airborne being the only ones to sell relatively well. Each game suffered from the same repetitive gameplay, and even the level design stayed the same. And while Call of Duty's single-player campaigns were relatively similar to the ones in Medal of Honor, Call of Duty also featured an addictive multiplayer mode, while Medal of Honor often lacked any adequate online features. The loyalty of the original fans was keeping the series alive for a long time, but all trust was lost after the disastrous release of Vanguard in 2007, which showcased the repetitive gameplay for the 10th consecutive time. In 2007, EA Los Angeles took a 3-year break. During this time, it was rebranded as Danger Close Games and received Bobby Moldovan as CEO, a position that he held until the studio's closure. After the disappointing release of Medal of Honor Heroes 2, EA decided to shake up the franchise and shift the setting of the next game from World War II to Afghanistan. The next installment was codenamed Medal of Honor Operation Anaconda, but was later shortened to just Medal of Honor, marking the series' complete reboot. The development of the game was shrouded in secrecy, with only a few rumors circulating about the series' upcoming comeback. The game was officially unveiled at E3 Expo in July 2010, accompanied by 2 trailers featuring Linkin Park songs, partially directed by Linkin Park's DJ, Joe Hahn. Electronic Arts went all out in promoting Medal of Honor, hiring notable composers, and having Chris Ryan to write a book explaining the game's lore. EA also released 3 different editions of the game and cross-promoted it with other Medal of Honor games and Battlefield 3. However, the development of the game itself posed challenges, as the studio was uncertain about EA's vision, whether they wanted a realistic game like Arma or a more casual shooter like Call of Duty. Struggling to make a decision, Danger Close chose a middle ground, creating a well-balanced gameplay around the dark and realistic lore of the game. However, due to severe staff changes, the studio found itself incapable to finish both single-player campaign and multiplayer mode on time. Therefore, EA tasked DICE, developers of Battlefield, to handle the multiplayer. As a result, single-player campaign, developed on Unreal Engine 3, felt slightly different from its online part, developed on Frostbite Engine 1.5. Despite this, DICE did an excellent job, blending the slow-paced Battlefield experience with the adrenaline-fueled shootouts from Call of Duty, the experiment that was positively received. However, their decision to include Taliban as one of the factions sparked a lot of controversy. They explained this decision stating that if someone wants to play a cop, then someone has to play a robber. But UK, Canadian, and Danish defense ministers didn't like that answer, stating that it is unacceptable for anyone to take a role of Taliban, and urged retailers to ban this tasteless product. The controversy was so strong that even United States military banned Medal of Honor on all their military bases. EA responded by renaming the Taliban faction to Opposing Forces, but the damage was already done. Nevertheless, the controversy generated free hype for the game, aiding to its commercial success. However, despite the high-quality execution, Medal of Honor didn't bring anything groundbreaking to the industry. Its story was filled with cliches, and its level design seemed heavily inspired by the Call of Duty Modern Warfare series. And while it had some thrilling moments, it lacked memorable characters and scenes, feeling more like a one-time watch movie than a reboot of a great franchise. Fortunately, the multiplayer mode fared better, attracting a small but dedicated fan base that supported the game to its very end. In conclusion, Medal of Honor, released in October 2010, received an average rating of 70% from critics and gamers and sold a little over 5 million copies worldwide. The game was a commercial success, marking it as the best-selling game in the franchise since Frontline. However, 5 million copies in sales isn't impressive. For comparison, Battlefield Bad Company 2 sold over 6 million copies with fewer marketing expenses, and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, the franchise's main competitor, sold over 25 million copies. Patrick Soderlund, an original Battlefield creator and vice president of EA at the time, advised the publisher that developing 2 separate military shooter franchises was unwise. He convinced management that despite its potential, Medal of Honor wasn't worth the effort required to revive the franchise, advocating for a focus on the battlefield instead, especially after the success of Battlefield 3. However, the sequel to Medal of Honor was already in development, and it was a big mess. The game engine was switched to Frostbite 2, which was complex and unfamiliar to Danger Close games. Additionally, the studio had less than 2 years, instead of the usual 3, to develop the game, including its online mode. This time, Danger Close received no assistance, and EA didn't bring in any new developers. Soderlund, on his end, decided to allocate about half of the game's budget to marketing, believing it was the only way to profit from the dying franchise. Linkin Park's music featured in the game once again, with Mike Shinoda producing 2 tracks for Warfighter's soundtrack. Also, 7 members of DevGru who worked as military consultants for the game were punished for unlawfully disclosing classified information to the game's creators. All these news generated positive hype around the game, supported by amazing trailers. But when Medal of Honor Warfighter was released in October 2012, it turned out to be a heartbreaking disappointment. The story was confusing and boring, and the overly scripted events weren't even trying to look natural. The gameplay shared the same attitude, as it was a collection of cliched features from Call of Duty and Battlefield franchises. Warfighter's release sparked anger among gamers and critics alike, earning an average rating of 53% and selling just over 3 million copies. The new Medal of Honor was such a disaster that some gaming publications mocked it, stating that there's no need to buy Warfighter, rent it instead. And it feels like a masterclass in middling modern warfare. In response, EA effectively closed Danger Close Games and rebranded it as DICE LA. The studio's main task from now on was to assist DICE with the Battlefield franchise, while Medal of Honor was forgotten for 8 years, only to make a ridiculous comeback and fade away again. In 2009, following a dispute with Activision on Modern Warfare 2, Vince Zampella returned to Electronic Arts, this time on his own terms, to establish Respawn Entertainment, which brought us games like Titanfall and Apex Legends. Given Zampella's key role in Allied Assault, it's no surprise that when he was approached in 2017 to work on the reboot of Medal of Honor, he couldn't resist. Initially, Respawn wanted to use Valve's Source engine for the game, as it had been used in all their previous projects. However, after a meeting with Facebook's directors, it was decided to make the new Medal of Honor an exclusive for VR platforms Oculus and Index. As a result, the company switched to Unreal Engine 4, which had better virtual reality support. The new Medal of Honor had some interesting features and design decisions, providing a truly immersive experience. However, the game had poor multiplayer mode, and the single-player campaign was disappointingly short. Despite these, the game was released with a price tag of a full AAA project, which was the main complaint among gamers. No one was willing to pay the price of a big adventure for a small, linear shooter on a platform they didn't even own. Consequently, Medal of Honor Above and Beyond, released in December 2020, received an average rating of 65% and sold just under 80,000 copies, which was ridiculous for once great series. It's no surprise that Above and Beyond was merely a promotion deal for new VR platforms and was never expected to sell well. But will the franchise ever recover from such disaster? Well, officially, EA has never abandoned Medal of Honor, and it's possible that the series will be revisited in the future. Once a franchise that opened markets for cinematic shooters and World War II games, Medal of Honor is now forgotten due to the indifference of its corporate bosses. The servers for all Medal of Honor games were shut down in 2023, but some of the more popular installments still have dedicated fans who keep supporting custom servers. Thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget to check out my previous video about the Battlefield franchise, which similarly explores the rise, triumphs, and decline of the franchise. I am the Games Guru, signing off. Love to all, and see you next Thursday. Bye-bye.